Hi, happy Testimony Tuesday. Hope your week is off to a great start. I was, in usual fashion, asking the Lord this morning, which testimony do you want me to share? What story do you think your people need to hear? And so, interestingly enough, this one actually, he caused me to think of one that popped up in my Facebook memories from 2016, and it just popped up last week. And I love Facebook for that reason, and that it can be a diary. And so we get reminded of things. And it's so funny because God has perfect timing in all things. So sometimes even the very thing we're typing is a message for us years down the road. So I believe that's what has happened with this. So my mom, in October of 2016, I had to call her and confirm the year because I forgot to jot that down when it showed up. But anyways, she reminded me it was 2016, and I'm like, oh yes. And so what happened was she'd been having some pain in her abdomen for more than a month. And my mom is a trooper. She's really strong. She's really tough. She's really stubborn. And she would not go to the doctor. Well, finally it got so bad that we ended up in the emergency room, and she ended up having emergency surgery. And come to find out, after what should have been, an hour or so of a surgery turned into 3 to 4 hours. And so it was very scary, if you will, because I think they took her in for surgery. It was after midnight. But the surgeon finally comes out to my son and I, who were in the waiting room, because we just decided to stay all night. And she said, your mom is tough. She's like, she had so much infection. Her appendix had ruptured, and it had walled itself off and was like attacking her insides. And by the grace and mercy of the Lord, she did not die from that. And even more so when they got in there and it was a much more complicated thing, by the grace and mercy of God, she didn't have any terrible complications from that in her abdomen or anything that turned into weeks and weeks and weeks of recovery. So we were super thankful for that. But so mom made it through that surgery fine. They put her up on the floor room when she got out of surgery. And I think it was the second night that she was in the hospital as an inpatient, she started getting very tachycardic. And that just means that the heart rate was very, very fast. Like, if I remember right, I want to say it was like in the 160s, like really high 170s. So they transferred her up to the cardiac ICU, started all the meds, to try to get that to respond and get under control. And so they think that the stress on her body and all of that is kind of the trigger that had happened there. Anyways, so she goes up to the ICU. She ended up spending 9 days in the hospital. And at that time, I had time to where I could spend, when I got done with my stuff during the day, I would go and sit by the bedside with her. I would stay the night with her in the chair, just make sure she had the things that she needed. She had great care there. We were so grateful for that. But I found myself at night being a little bit restless, and that's a big, big hospital. And so I would put my earbuds in and literally walk the halls and listen to music and talk to God and think about all the things. And one night, it was probably maybe the second night she was in ICU, I'm not sure, but they had put her on some medication, to a combination of medication to try to get her heart to respond and reset itself and bring that heartbeat back into where it should be. Well, the game plan was, if she didn't respond, if her heart didn't respond to the medication route within like a 24-hour time period, then they were going to have to do a cardioversion, which is essentially where they shock your heart and, try to get it reset like that. Well, my mom was very, very afraid of that. The whole idea of it freaked her out. It does to me too, so I don't blame her. And so we knew that the following morning was when they were going to do that procedure, but they were just waiting. And she had even kind of talked the doctor into waiting a little bit longer than what they really wanted to. And it was so interesting because the night before, 2 nights before that deadline, I had been walking the halls listening to music, and I walked by the chapel at Wesley Hospital, and it's a beautiful little chapel. You'll miss it if you're not really watching for it. And I went in there and talked to the Lord, and was just, it was probably, it was late at night, and I had been in a season where I had been pressing the Lord on some things for my family. At that time, I was a single mom. I had been praying about some specific things, and I really felt like I wasn't hearing the Lord. I felt like he was mostly silent. I remember saying, like, just tell me what to do. Tell me what to do. And I would just get little to nothing. And I just felt kind of discouraged about that. And anyways, so I was in that place, and I had been praying, that night. Well, the following day, I posted a picture of the chapel in Wesley on my Facebook. It was beautiful. It was like picturesque to me. So I shared it, and something happened that I did not expect. So what began to happen is that friends and acquaintances on my Facebook started to comment, and it became something where there were all these testimonies of people that shared, like, going to that chapel when their loved one was in the hospital or sick and dying of cancer or some procedure or something. And it really touched my heart because, I hadn't quite thought of it that way, that when I was in there, my mom was expected to recover fine, but so many before me had sat in that chapel pleading with the Lord and begging for mercy and healing for their loved ones, and in brokenness and sadness and all of the unknown. And that whole day, like, as the stories started to come in, I just felt this sense of just sad and I felt guilty that I that picture elicited all these, not great memories for people, and it just really hurt my heart. So that night, that following night, that night that I had posted that picture, again, mom was still in ICU, and then that next morning was the deadline for the cardioversion to occur if her heart had not reset. So after mom went to sleep, I went and walked the halls again, and this one, it was the later night. I want to say I started walking around 11:30 at night, walked for about an hour, but I went into the chapel again just after midnight, and I came to the Lord, and I was just pouring my heart out to him about all of the people that had sat in that room, and I just lifted them up in prayer for all time and circumstance that they'd ever been in there. I prayed for the ones that were going to be coming in there. I just, asked him to do what only he can do in his infinite wisdom and timing and spirit for those who need. And so as I'm praying this, and I'm praying again, putting my things at the altar that I'd been pressing him for and hadn't felt like I'd been hearing him, and just spent time in there. Got done with that, went back up to mom's room. It was probably around 12:30 or so, and then got my little chair and found my restless sleep through the night. Very interestingly enough, when the nurse came in the morning to do my mom's initial checks and everything, she stirred both of us when she was messing with my mom, and my mom asked about that procedure, and she said, and the nurse goes, "Oh, you don't need to have that procedure. At 12:15 a.m., your heart reset itself, so you don't need the cardioversion." And I looked at my mom, and she had no idea I had been walking the halls, and that I was in the chapel praying for that, praying for her, praying for other things at that time. And the Lord chose to do that, and they were able to tell that because she was on continuous heart monitoring. So the nurse was able to say exactly the time that her heart reset. And it was so beautiful because, as I shared, I just wasn't feeling like I was hearing from the Lord, but that was his way of saying, I hear you. I am right there in the midst of it. And even though you don't hear my voice audibly, I'm showing you signs that your prayers are being heard, and I am faithful. I love your mom. I love you. And it was just beautiful. And so that is the testimony I wanted to share to you because, we go through so many things, and we don't know on this side of heaven the whys all the time. And most of the time we'll never know until we see him face to face. And things are hard, and there's so much wrapped up in mystery. And, you know, we go through trials and we go through difficult things. You know, they're meant to strengthen us and grow our character and grow our hearts to be more like him. And there's so much purpose in that, and there's so much beauty in that, even though it doesn't feel like it while we're going through it. So, and it was interesting, I forgot this part. While I was in the chapel and I asked this question, see, this is why I do notes sometimes, but then I just start talking. But it was interesting because you know, when I was sitting in the chapel and I was talking to the Lord about the people who had sat there before me and the people that would sit there after me, and, you know, just pondering the question of why do we have so much pain in this life? Why do you allow us to go through so much pain in this life? Two things he did speak to me, because and when the Lord speaks to me, he doesn't say Psalms 32:15, Azure, blah 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 blah. He says the sentence or the phrase, and then I later go Google it or go to my Bible and I look it up. And so when I was sitting in that moment and I was asking him, you know, why do we go through such painful things? He never promised this life would be easy. And he never promised we weren't going to not have heartache. But I was just sitting in that question, and two things he did speak to me in my mind, and this is what he said. He brought to my mind, for my thoughts are not your thoughts. And the actual verse from Isaiah 55:8-9 says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. So he knows and sees and understands all time, circumstance, and places for all eternity, always has. So we have to find a resting point in that. He is a good father, and he is in control of all of it. And the second thing, the second phrase that he brought to my mind is the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. And that comes out of Psalms 34:18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. And that is a promise, my friends. That is the truth. He is always there. He is always close. Even if we aren't noticing when he's speaking to us or hearing him clearly, he is faithful and he loves you. He wants you to know that. So I hope you have a great Tuesday, and I will see you next week.